Hello and welcome to South Fork Law. I'm Jill Bernstein, a retired criminal defense attorney, and with me are my co-hosts, Doug Hildahl from the Law Office of Lester and Hildahl, and Dave Nelson from the Law Office of David A. Nelson. Both Doug and Dave are criminal defense lawyers, although Dave's firm also handles some municipal court prosecutions. All three of us are passionate about justice and hope to use our time on the radio to inform the community about the justice system. Tonight's very special guest is Lieutenant William Sladisko of the Bellingham Police Department. Welcome, Lieutenant Sladisko.
Thank you.
Why don't you tell our listeners a little bit about how you got involved in law enforcement and what your career has looked like there? What are the various things that you've done?
Well, I've been at Bellingham PD for 32 years. I started as a patrol officer, as everyone who comes to the police department does. I spent time as a crime scene investigator, CSI, before it was trendy. I was a patrol sergeant. I worked in narcotics investigations. I was a traffic sergeant, so I rode a motorcycle. They paid me to ride a motorcycle for a while.
Rough duty.
I think you and I met maybe once or twice that way, too.
And then subsequently, I was promoted to lieutenant, so I was patrol lieutenant. And then for the last 3.5 years, I've been assigned to the 911 Center, Watcom, as operations manager.
What does that mean?
Well, it means that I managed and supervised the roughly 29 people that work there, most of which are dispatchers, but the rest of them are support staff, IT staff, training coordinator, GIS person. We use GIS, Geographical Information Systems, to plot where calls happen, especially cell phone calls, so that we know where people are when they need help.
Well, 32 years is a long career in law enforcement. What is it that attracted you to law enforcement as your career?
I had a friend who was a police officer over in Eastern Washington. I rode with him and really enjoyed the experience, both the unpredictability and the opportunity to be helpful to people.
And has it been a not boring job that's allowed you to be helpful to people?
You know, there are long periods of sort of boredom followed by brief periods of extreme excitement. And in between, that's actually where you, I think, do the most good, is you use those periods where you're not occupied by running from call to call to call or in critical emergencies, being helpful to people and being of service.
Tell me a little bit about the Bellingham Police Department's approach to community policing. How are police officers deployed throughout the community? All in cars, or are they on foot, bikes, that sort of thing?
Officers are assigned to patrol beats in cars. Those are the patrol officers, so those are the folks that are taking the 911 calls, and when they have time, they're doing other things. We have a neighborhood anti-crime team. Those folks are assigned to particular crime problems that come up, and also sometimes what we think of as smaller issues, the quality of life issues in the neighborhoods.
Graffiti and broken windows.
Code violations, abandoned houses, trashy houses, those sorts of things that literally get people where they live. And so we're real concerned about that as well. There are traffic officers who ride motorcycles. There are detectives who do the follow-up investigations, particularly on felony crimes. We have one officer who is assigned to the high schools as a resource officer.
Well, tonight we wanted to talk particularly about the intersection of law enforcement and members of our community who have mental health problems. And we're guessing that you, from where you sit at the 911 Center, have the big picture about that intersection. Can you tell our listeners a little bit about how people with mental health problems wind up coming to the attention of law enforcement, and then what happens with them?
Well, first, I've got to say that prior to Watcom Counseling and Psychiatric Clinic's acquisition by Compass Mental Health, and that it was a nonprofit, I was on the board of directors of Whatcom Counseling and Psychiatric, and I continue on the our local advisory board that is constituted to advise the Board of Compass about our local issues here in Whatcom County. People come to the attention of law enforcement officers due to their mental health issues in a lot of ways. They can be acting out on the street and somebody calls. They're concerned. We get these 911 calls, and so far, year to date, I checked as of yesterday, we'd taken 484 reports. That doesn't mean that all of those rose to the level of, all the calls rose to the level of taking a report, because we had, when I looked in our computer-aided dispatch system, we had 1,190 calls, and not all those calls, not all the 911 calls necessarily get entered even as a CAD incident. So because we have some people we recognize as repeated callers, a lot of times those don't get entered. But we get people who are disorderly.
Well, the 484 relates to people who you believe have mental health problems so far this year.
Those are people that officers, in their interaction with them, identify these folks as having strictly a mental health issue. And there can be other issues intertwined that aren't necessarily identified as a mental health issue. There's, in this case, this is something that is as titled as mental health issue. The report is specifically titled as a mental health issue, as opposed to something else where mental health is an underlying cause.
So it's not these are incidents or folks that are contacted solely because of a mental health issue, not because they're suspected of a crime,
right,
or they're being victimized or something like that.
Right.
So that's about a third
lot
of the calls that you received at 911?
That's about a third of the actual CAD calls we received that were identified as a mental health issue. Right. We get, year to date, we're at about 55,000 calls, to put that in perspective, and that is incidentally about 10% ahead of last year. But these are calls that are specifically identified as somebody's having a mental health issue at this time. It can be somebody who's assaultive, engaging in dangerous behavior. It can be somebody, and some of these that aren't necessarily identified as a mental health issue, but clearly are. We have people who attempt suicide, and sometimes people are successful. And we take those suicide threats very seriously. Those folks are transported. When somebody threatens suicide, they're taken in for an evaluation. We're not mental health professionals. We're not going to judge or make the determination that they shouldn't go. We're going to take them.
Well, you're not mental health professionals, but 484 times you were asked to go out and deal with someone whose problem wasn't criminal but was mental health. That's putting law enforcement in a pretty difficult situation, isn't it?
Well, I think law enforcement's in a difficult situation in a lot of arenas.
Well, they're always in a pretty difficult situation.
But that's really, I mean, that's a pretty significant number. And law enforcement is being asked to go out and perform a job that they're not particularly trained for.
Well, we do have some specific training surrounding identifying people with mental health issues.
Tell us about that, please.
Everybody at the academy, at the basic academy, gets at least 8 hours of training on people with respect to people who are in crisis. And that includes mental health issues. We have about 17 of our officers have been to crisis intervention training. That's a 40-hour class. And the chief's intention is for the entire department to have that training because that crisis intervention training is oriented towards how do you best deal with somebody who has mental illness on the street? How do you not provoke an incident where you have to use force, yet be safe and use force when it's necessary to deal with somebody? And so that's a difficult balancing act. That crisis intervention training, we call it the Memphis model because that's where it originated about, I believe about 10 years ago. It was a community partnership of Memphis Police Department, Memphis mental health providers, and the National Alliance for the Mentally Ill. They developed the curriculum, and so we're following that standardized curriculum. It's offered through the Criminal Justice Training Commission, and our commitment is to train all of our patrol officers. Initial idea with CIT, or crisis intervention training, was there would be some specialized officers available to respond to these situations where they were needed. And there's no guarantee that there's going to be one of those officers on duty,
Right.
or that they're going to be available to respond due to other things that are happening. So if we train all of the officers, then we're pretty well assured that we'll have somebody with that training available to respond. Additionally, all the officers about a year ago received 8 hours of crisis intervention training in a more succinct and shorter format, just to get us up to speed and to refresh what we had in the academy and make sure we're able to deal with those situations as they come up.
You're listening to South Fork Law. Our special guest tonight is Lieutenant Bill Sodisco of the Bellingham Police Department. I'd like to tell you about an incident that happened in front of my house and ask you how that compares with the types of contacts that police have with mentally ill folks. Basically what happened, there was a gentleman, it looked fairly transient, etc., but he was yelling and screaming as though he was very, very angry. It's hard to tell. He was by himself. It was hard to tell what he was angry. I frankly stayed in my house and watched until the police came. There were, I think, 2 patrol cars, and the officers kept their distance from the fella and talked to him, and and engaged him in a very friendly, sort of non-threatening way to begin with. And he responded in a hostile and verbally hostile, although not physically aggressive way. And eventually, they seemed to talk him down, and he simply moved on. Is that something that happens a lot? Are those the types of interactions that police have with mentally ill folks? What other types are there?
Yeah, those sorts of incidents can happen with some regularity, and those are the incidents that a report's not necessarily even written on. We just come and do and de-escalate, and we end up leaving. Sometimes people don't want to identify themselves. Sometimes a report's written on things like that. Sometimes it'll be a family that calls because they have an issue with somebody. In this case, this adult child lives in the home. He's autistic and has some delusional behavior, and they really needed some help with this person. They had already been in touch with the mental health professional. There was a bed available, but this child didn't want to go with the parents to the ER to end up in this treatment bed. So officers responded and were able to convince the person to get in the back of the car and go to the hospital. So that was an example of the kind of incidents where officers just come and do and problem solve. Another situation that I can think of, an adult child with mental illness issues, delusional. Mom was scared because this adult child was, you've got the devil in you, and I've got to touch you and get the devil out. But Mom was scared enough to lock herself in her room until the officers could come, and ultimately that adult child left. Mom was concerned that they were going to be spending the night on the street. Well, they can do that. That didn't fall into the imminent danger criteria.
Imminent danger is what gets someone involuntarily committed
That's right.
at the hospital.
Imminent danger to themselves or others, and the other criteria is gravely disabled, but didn't fit that criteria. Located the adult child at a bus stop. They weren't indicating that they were suicidal or a danger to anyone else, and it's got to be an imminent danger. It just can't be, oh, I think I'm scared. There's got to be some manifest behavior there that tells us that they need to go for an evaluation. So they checked on this person. They said they had a place to go for the night, and so we
those
drive
are two
away.
cases where the police were able to take a problem that wasn't criminal, that was mental health related, and make it better. I had a chance to chat with you not long ago, though, where you were sharing with me the danger to the police when they're asked to help with mental health problems. And in fact, somebody met law enforcement with their shotgun when they came to try to help, right?
That's right. We went to a motel on Samish Way for a mental health pickup order. This mental health professional that worked with this person determined that they needed to be seen. So officers responded there, and the person that they wanted to pick up stepped out from behind a curtain with a shotgun and shot at the officers. And officers returned fire, and the person was struck, not fatally. So that was good.
That's good.
Yeah.
But so there's real danger to law enforcement as they try to do good and help with mental health problems in the community.
That's right, and it's sometimes very difficult to determine if somebody's dangerous or if they're just manifesting threatening behavior as opposed to being truly dangerous, and that's part of the gist of having the crisis intervention training.
Well, one of the
significant part of the reason.
statistics that you shared was that 23% of the use of force instances last year in our community involved people with mental health problems.
And we're looking year to date, and that's about 25% at this point. And sometimes that means that somebody gets arrested, but we also know them as someone who has mental health issues. Sometimes it means that we need to take them into custody for an evaluation, and they fight. Use of force means anything beyond normal handcuffing. So it can be just twisting somebody's arm up to having to fight them and roll around on the ground with them and get them in handcuffs so we can take them in, or
Shoot 'em.
have the medics. Yeah, we really don't like to go there.
I know that you don't like any of it. I'm guessing that you don't like any of it.
And sometimes we'll use the medics will do a transport for us because we're not capable of transporting somebody in a car. You know, they're so violent that they need to be strapped to a gurney to get to the hospital for the evaluation.
Right. There's the use of force by the police and is a whole nother radio show.
Yes,
or
it is.
10 or 20.
But
But is there a difference in the way that an officer is trained to respond to someone who has a recognizable mental health problem than someone who does not, in terms of force? Does that factor into how an officer responds, and if so, how?
I think it's strictly behavioral. If it's something that we need to take somebody into custody on, whether it's for a mental health evaluation or to take them to jail, I think we deal with force on force in the way that's appropriate, and we use necessary and reasonable force.
Right.
We don't go beyond that. And
There's you've heard it. I think we've all heard it. I don't know how real it is, but the term suicide by cop, and that to me, at any rate, means that it's somebody who's seeking a response, perhaps not seeking to harm an officer, but seeking a response where
seeking
they
to provoke a response that
hurts
is fatal
themselves.
to them.
Right,
Yeah,
right.
yeah, and I believe that happens sometimes.
Is that recognizable before it happens or while it's happening? So that if you can then judge the sincerity of the hostile intent of the person. Is that possible to do?
I think that there might be those circumstances where you can recognize it, but I don't know that I want to bet my life on it.
No. Nor would I ever suggest that.
Yeah.
But it's just
Sometimes the circumstances that present themselves may lead an officer to believe that that's what's going on, but you still have to respond with the appropriate safety in mind for both the officer and the person to the extent possible. Right. Gosh, if we can diffuse that situation, that's awesome.
Nobody ever wants to shoot.
No.
Well, Lieutenant, could you tell our listeners how and why people with mental health problems wind up going to jail rather than the hospital, including why someone might get booked into the jail on a nonviolent offense?
Well, I can give you an example. And we had one of the big box retail stores called in to complain about a woman who was inside shouting that there are people outside with guns, and she continued to do that. And officers responded, and The store tried to accommodate her by saying, hey, look, we'll go outside and look, but just please be quiet. And the officers came, and she was still shouting and continued to shout. And finally, the officers and the store wanted her to leave the property. Now, this wasn't one of those circumstances where she could have been taken into custody as being an imminent danger to herself or somebody else. It was a situation where she continued to be disorderly on private property. So
And she was annoying everybody.
she was annoying everybody.
And scaring people.
And that's right, scaring people. And so the officer finally got her to leave. But this is a situation where, had she gone back after she'd been warned to leave by the store, and there was no other problem-solving options available, that is, we couldn't take her in for an evaluation involuntarily, that's a situation where somebody might get booked into jail. And then, once they're booked into jail and manifest those issues, then they tend to get seen. But that's not the ideal solution.
So we use the jail then to sort of corral people and get them ready for a mental health evaluation, and then hopefully get more appropriate resources to address their problems.
That can certainly happen.
In a circumstance like that, an officer might say, look, you've got to leave. If you come back, I'm going to either give you a ticket or arrest you. Now,
Right, and we would like them to leave. We would like them to not place us in a situation where we have to problem solve in that manner. And we're pretty good at problem solving. And if we can find some alternative, this officer offered this woman rides, alternatives. We'll take you somewhere else. And sometimes the problem might be solved by, well, let's give you, look, here's the deal. We're going to put you in handcuffs, transport you to the other end of town, and release you from there, maybe near your friend's house, so you can go to your friend's house or near home, so that you can't get back there. But if it's pretty clear that they're going to go back in the store and continue to cause problems, then we're left without choices.
The whole notion, though, of using law enforcement to do the job of the mental health professionals, the community, the hospitals, and the rest of it still seems to me to be a pretty crazy way, if you will, of addressing health problems in our community. And I think you shared with me that some of this comes from the fact that Washington State is 47th in the nation for providing funds for community-based mental health treatment.
Yep,
That's
that
a
was-
terrible statistic.
That was according to an article in the Daily Olympian, based on what I believe to be significantly factual information. So,
If we had more money, what should we do with it?
we should provide more treatment beds. The state's under a court order to provide more treatment beds and stop warehousing people in hospitals. So more treatment beds are key to it. We need to fund our mental health agencies, the community-based mental health agencies, an adequate level, because they struggle with the funding model, the fee-for-service model that they're given. And we need supported living beds. So those are some of the folks that might not be very good at taking their medication because of their mental health issues. They might not be very good at making their way in the world because of their mental health issues. And when they don't have some structure, then they don't take their meds, and they get in situations where their mental health causes them to be on the street or engage in conduct that causes concern, that generates calls. So when they're in a supported living environment, and we have some of those beds here in Bellingham, but somebody's checking on them, they've got a safe place to stay, and they're getting their medications.
Well, more money would allow for some of these things to happen, and then I would guess that law enforcement could use their resources for other things.
We would like to use our resources appropriately, yes, rather than as the fallback for mental health.
what, if anything, can the general public do to help the police and us with this problem?
Well, I think it's a political solution, so you need to talk to your representatives and encourage them to provide the adequate funding that is needed in the community.
Well, our listeners, I guess, need to know that some of the people we're talking about are military veterans and who are returning to our community with brain injuries and emotional problems, and they're some of the people who come to your attention.
That's true, and we hope that some of those are taken care of through the Veterans Administration, but some don't, and sometimes the resources aren't available locally. That's more of a veterans question, but we do encounter people that suffer from PTSD, and had one example of somebody who called. They were just struggling, and we were finally able to connect them with their niece who was looking in on them. But the niece said, "Look, this person is slowly deteriorating, and we need better treatment options for them, and they're not getting those better treatment options."
Well, has that the issue, has the prevalence of veterans with problems with PTSD and other combat related problems, has that changed? Are there more folks out there like that now than there used to be? I mean, you and I both go back about 32, 33 years, and we remember some folks from the Vietnam War.
We had Vietnam era veterans, and now we have Middle East veterans
Right.
who suffered many of the same things.
Is that right? And we're seeing a lot more of that? Or
I
is
think
it-
we're seeing some more of that, and I don't know about the prevalence here versus some other places where folks tend to settle, around military bases and so on. Might be seeing a bit more of that than we have here.
Well, it sounds like there are solutions that are available to free up police time to do police work if we were to fully fund mental health services in our community.
It would certainly be helpful.
Thank you so much.
Well, thanks very much, Lieutenant. We come to the end of another episode of South Fork Law. Our special guest has been Lieutenant William Sladisco of the Bellingham Police Department. We invite you to check us out on our Facebook page at South Fork Law. We'd like to thank our engineer, Robert Clark, for his efforts here tonight, and as well as Lieutenant Sladisco, and we hope you all can find some justice out there.